In 1450, the Aztec Empire was the most powerful civilization in Mesoamerica. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, rose from a lake in the middle of Mexico, an island city of 200,000 people, larger than any city in Europe at the time. Its markets, its temples, its floating gardens were described by the Spanish, who eventually saw it as the most beautiful city they had ever witnessed. The Aztec Triple Alliance, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan, controlled a vast network of tributary states. Subject peoples paid tribute in gold, cotton, jade, cacao, feathers, and slaves. The empire's army was legendary, disciplined, organized, terrifying. The Jaguar Knights and Eagle Knights, Aztec elite warriors, were among the most feared soldiers in the known world. When the Aztecs went to war, they won. Cities that resisted were burned. Populations that defied them were massacred. So when historians discovered that there was one particular group of neighbors the Aztecs fought for 70 years and never conquered, it raised an obvious question. Why? The Tlaxcalans, the Xochiyaotlans, the Cholulans, these neighboring peoples fought the Aztecs in dozens of battles over decades, and the Aztec Empire, which could have destroyed them, chose not to. The answer is one of the strangest military strategies in the history of warfare. To understand the Flower Wars, you have to understand what the Aztecs believed about the universe. The Aztecs believed the world had been created and destroyed 4 times already. They were living in the 5th sun, the 5th age of the world, and they believed it was profoundly fragile. The sun itself required nourishment to keep moving across the sky. Without it, the sun would stop. The world would end in darkness. What nourished the sun? Blood. Human blood. Human sacrifice was not a fringe practice for the Aztecs. It was the central obligation of their civilization. The gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and humanity owed them a debt that could only be repaid in blood. To fail to sacrifice was to doom the world to extinction. This created an enormous logistical problem. You need human hearts and blood to keep the sun moving. But you can only sacrifice humans if you have them. And you can only get humans by capturing them in war. Which means the Aztec military machine wasn't just about territorial expansion or tribute collection. It was, fundamentally, a machine designed to produce sacrificial victims. And for that, you don't need to kill your enemies. You need to capture them alive. The Flower Wars. Xochiyaoyotl in Nahuatl were not a secret conspiracy or a deceptive trap. They were a formal agreement between the Aztec Triple Alliance and its designated opponents, primarily the Tlaxcalans and Xochiyaotlans. Both sides knew the rules. Both sides agreed to them, and both sides followed them. The goal was not to conquer territory, not to destroy armies. The goal was to capture as many warriors as possible, alive, while losing as few of your own as possible. This changed everything about how the battles were fought. Aztec warriors used obsidian-edged swords called macuahuitl, weapons capable of decapitating a horse, as the Spanish later discovered. But in the Flower Wars, warriors deliberately aimed for legs and arms rather than the body or head. You wanted to wound your opponent, bring him to the ground, subdue him, and then capture him. Killing your opponent in a Flower War was actually considered a failure, a disgrace. You had destroyed a valuable resource. The greatest honor in Aztec warrior culture was not to kill many enemies. It was to capture them. A warrior who captured 4 enemies in a single Flower War was inducted into the elite ranks of the Aztec military. He received new clothing, new weapons, special status. And his captured enemies? They were treated with surprising respect. Captured warriors were brought back to Tenochtitlan with ceremony. They were washed, fed well, and given good clothing. They were housed comfortably. Their captor was required to treat them as honored guests, almost as adoptive family members. And then, at the appointed time, they were sacrificed. The sacrifices at the great temple of Tenochtitlan, the Templo Mayor, were elaborate, public rituals conducted at the top of the pyramid. A captive was placed on the sacrificial stone. 4 priests held his limbs. A 5th priest plunged an obsidian knife into his chest, cut out his still-beating heart, and held it up to the sun. It was an act of giving, not cruelty, by Aztec understanding. The captive was feeding the gods. He was participating in the maintenance of the universe. The scale of Aztec sacrifice has been debated by historians for centuries. Spanish accounts described tens of thousands of skulls displayed on a rack called the Tzompantli. Recent archaeological excavations of the Templo Mayor have confirmed that the Tzompantli was real and enormous. Thousands of skulls cemented together in a tower. To maintain this system, the Aztecs needed a constant, reliable supply of captives, and the flower wars were their solution. But there was a problem with the flower wars that the Aztecs seemed to have understood and chosen to ignore. The Tlaxcalans and their allies were losing warriors to Aztec sacrifice at a devastating rate. They knew exactly what was happening to their captured men. They had seen the Tzompantli. They understood the system, and yet the Aztecs chose not to simply conquer Tlaxcala and end the arrangement. The most compelling theory: Tlaxcala served as a reservoir. If the Aztecs conquered Tlaxcala, they would lose their most reliable source of high-quality flower war opponents. They needed Tlaxcala to remain independent, because an independent Tlaxcala meant a continuing supply of trained, elite warriors to capture. Whatever the reasoning, the Tlaxcalans developed a burning, generational hatred for the Aztecs. Every family had lost brothers, fathers, sons to the obsidian knife. They could not defeat the Aztec military. They could not stop the flower wars. But they remembered, and they waited. In 1519, a Spanish expedition led by Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico. Cortés had a few hundred soldiers, 16 horses, and 10 cannons. He was marching toward the most powerful empire in Mesoamerica. The Tlaxcalans initially fought the Spanish. Hard. For nearly 2 weeks, Tlaxcalan warriors attacked the Spanish forces in fierce battles. But then something shifted. Tlaxcalan leaders made a calculation. The Spanish were clearly enemies of the Aztecs, the enemy of my enemy. After decades of ritual slaughter and humiliation, was worth talking to. Cortés and the Tlaxcalan leadership negotiated an alliance. What the Tlaxcalans gave Cortés was transformative. Thousands of veteran warriors who knew Aztec battle tactics, supply lines through Tlaxcalan territory, guides, intelligence, logistical support that turned a few hundred Spanish soldiers into the tip of a much larger military force. The combined force marched on Tenochtitlan. What followed? The siege of the Aztec capital, the fall of Moctezuma's empire, the destruction of the most magnificent city in the Americas, is one of the most dramatic events in recorded history. The Aztec Empire fell in 1521, 2 years after Cortés's arrival. In its final siege, the combined Spanish and Tlaxcalan force, tens of thousands of warriors, with Tlaxcalans forming the overwhelming majority of the fighting force, dismantled Tenochtitlan block by block. The causeways were cut. The water supply was cut off. The population starved and died of smallpox simultaneously. When Tenochtitlan finally fell, the Tlaxcalans ransacked it with particular ferocity. They had waited a long time for this. And here is the irony that historians have contemplated ever since. The Aztec flower war system. The strategy designed to maintain divine favor, to keep the sun moving, to sustain the empire's religious obligations, was the direct cause of the empire's destruction. If the Aztecs had simply conquered Tlaxcala the way they conquered everyone else, there would have been no independent Tlaxcalan state to ally with the Spanish. Cortés, with his few hundred soldiers and his cannons, would have faced the full weight of the Aztec military machine without local support. He would almost certainly have failed. Instead, the Aztecs had spent 70 years creating the most motivated, most militarily experienced, most Aztec-hating army in Mesoamerica. And they had chosen, deliberately, to leave it intact. They let their enemies survive because they needed them for the gods. And their enemies used that survival to destroy them. The gods, apparently, were not appeased.